I have got a podcast sponsor. I was happy to partner with Modern Roots Life. And this is really cool because it's a Christian company. Modern Roots Life, they provide natural health supplements, natural salts, beef liver, magnesium, copper, lots of things. Natural, third-party tested supplements. And I think for me, I often complain about being very tired and having a bit of brain fog trying to do everything that we're trying to do. So I just started my regime. And so I'm excited to see how it works out because I think like you guys in this community that we don't really want to go to the doctor anymore. And I'm not saying you'll never have to, but I'm saying that if I can be more healthy, then I'm doing my best to try to do that now. Physically and spiritually and mentally. So if you guys want to check out Modern Roots Life, check out the link in my description. People often ask how they can support me. Well, I think it's really cool if you can support me by supporting people that support me and you get something in return. And obviously being healthy is a pretty good return.
Come closer, my child.
My guest today is a content creator. He has a movie called Ancient Angels. You can see it on his shirt here. He has a show called JT's Mixtape. JT, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I do make short videos, movies, and podcasts mostly. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. If I forgot anything there, you could tell people.
No, I mean if you find me on anything, I've got a link tree, and I'm kind of putting most of my focus on YouTube. So if you just look up JT follows JC, and then you can find a link in my description. And you can, if you want to see the movie, obviously you can tell it's a play off Ancient Aliens. Ancient Angels is, I believe, it's a more true depiction of like the mythologies that the people talked about, the megaliths. They mentioned gods did it. They didn't mention aliens did it. So I think that's why, and from a Christian perspective, it all centers around the gods of these other religions were angels. And and also obviously giants and everything was mentioned, which is kind of interesting. And all the big buzz in the news recently is that the pyramids have these LiDAR scans and there are all these things under them.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked into that?
I have. I looked into it briefly yesterday. You know, I think it's funny because it was either yesterday or the day before when the story like really broke, like in our community, right? Like all the alternative people were talking about it on Instagram, and so I was just like, oh, let me see what happens. Let me see what happens if I put this into Google. Let's see what the mainstream has to say about this. And it's funny. I took a screenshot of it, but Google was running and other like news outlets on Google were running a story not about the pyramids, but not about the structures beneath them. It was two separate narratives at the same time. And Google was talking about, they were running a story about how skeletons found in the pyramids may not have been royalty. So, and that was about 3 or 4 different news outlets that Google was featuring were running that same story. And it's interesting because the overall narrative there is basically, you know, people still think that these things are tombs.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's funny to see like people in our community talking about, oh, this LiDAR, man, there's like 2,000 feet or something of structures beneath these things,
Yeah,
but the
it's like,
mainstream's still talking about them being tombs.
well, maybe that's I didn't know. That's interesting because I was more curious about why they're telling us now because I'm obviously skeptical of everything they tell us.
Yeah,
And I
sure.
think that in all the research I've done, I thought, well, of course there's things under them. I knew that there was things under them. Everybody's always said that there's stuff under Egypt. And the idea that they just found that out, I find that really hard to believe.
I'm actually on board with that too. That I should have probably led with that because I'm very I'm just going to watch from the bench on this. I'm just going to see what happens. I'm
Yeah, I
skeptical
want to
too.
see what they're going to say. But no, it is interesting though that if your favorite ancient archaeology content creator posts about this. And so you still have all these skeptical people. Oh, I'm going to go see what blah, 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 the AP says about this. And then they don't get a real story. And so people are saying, oh, there's big pyramid news, and they really don't know what it is. And they go to look for, yeah, their biggest mainstream media outlet, and they direct them to some story that's irrelevant.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
It's
it's like, so
this.
that's interesting too.
Yeah, that I thought that was interesting. It's like they didn't even like Google didn't even feature a TikTok video or anything, and TikTok was on fire with this story that
Yeah.
day. And it just goes to show you that some people are still pushing this old dusty narrative that they're not tombs. I mean, maybe they buried a couple dudes in there, but that's not why they built them, in my opinion. I think they had multiple purposes.
What do you think
And
they were used for?
well, I think that some sort of ancient technology, some sort of a maybe energy, maybe there is something to the chemical aspect of that too. You get that word chem, land of chem.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Kemet. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and you have alchemy. If you look at the story of Isis, some of the earliest stories of alchemy involving Isis, and she was talking to angels, bro. You know, that's how the story goes. At least she was doing
Mm-hmm.
magic. She's talking to angels. She gets in touch with an angel. That angel cannot answer her questions, so that angel refers her to like a higher angel in the hierarchy, and then she learns the mysteries. She learns alchemy, and thus alchemy is kind of born in Egypt. That's one version of the story of how that came to be. So and you have alchem and all that. So yeah, I think that you have a blend of ancient technology, chemistry, and maybe some other stuff happening there. But what's interesting is if you look into a guy named John Kinnaman, he's one of these archaeologists that was sort of like forgotten by history. He worked for the Smithsonian at one point, but they kind of have erased this guy's legacy. But he was doing in the 20s, he was doing work on the Great Pyramid, and he found a chamber in the south wall, and they found records stored in there.
Oh, really? I never heard that. I've never heard that.
Yes, and it's been swept up. You know, it's been swept up really well. This story has, but like the in the records, apparently they were talking about how they built the pyramids in the first place, and they were using anti-gravity craft of some sort. So they had advanced technology, and they were making these probably for some other type of for some reason involving that. And they said that the Atlanteans, the records kind of pointed back to the Atlanteans doing this, building those pyramids. And of course, so Kinnaman was under two governments at the time. He was under the British government and of course the Egyptian government. And they all got together, had a powwow, and said, "We're not going to talk about this." So, long story short, and I know I'm running long on this response, but I think it goes back to Cain in the Bible in Genesis. When Cain left after he killed Abel, he went off to start his own civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Enoch is in the bad Enoch is in his family line. Lamech is in his family line. Lamech had two kids, or three kids, Jubal Cain, Tubal, and a girl named Nama, and another one actually. They were kind of in charge with kind of watching over this knowledge that Cain had learned in the garden, but it's kind of turned into like dark knowledge at this point. It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
the mysteries, it's the seven sacred sciences and all that stuff. So I think that those people built the pyramid, somebody from Cain's line. Because if you look up a term called nine vaults on Google, you'll get the Freemasons version of this story. And the Freemasons version says that uh, Tubal Cain and his brother had stored the knowledge underneath the pyramids.
Yeah,
Um,
I've heard that actually. I read Gary Wayne's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and he
mhm.
talks a lot about that.
Yeah,
That they believe that some of the antediluvian knowledge was stored under there, and then people like Thoth or Mercury are the ones who basically released it back out into for the people.
yeah. So long story short, I, I think that if you look at the John Kinnaman story and you look at the nine vaults in the Freemasons record and a lot of the stuff, yeah, that Gary Lane talks about, I think the overall picture is you had you have an older civilization called Atlantis, or it's very Atlantis-like. All the mythologies talk about this too, like a place like that. And I think it probably started with Cain. So that's and but here's the thing. I'll be honest about this. I don't know what they built the pyramids for, but I think personally, I think they're the ones who built them.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on board with what you're saying. I've like especially in my movie, I've believed that the older, the most probably impressive megaliths around the world, they were before the flood. And I think it had something to do with giants. So I think that that's
Mhm.
why the blocks are so big. And all the ancient mythologies all around the world, they always talk about giants being associated with stone and megaliths. So, but I think it's interesting, yeah, like it doesn't look like it was a tomb. There was never any mummies found in the Great Pyramid. Um, I think it makes sense that it did have something to do with maybe like an ancient power station, or I have had Derek Olson on the podcast one time. He's really good. He's Stargate Voyager,
Oh yeah.
and he mentioned that he believed they could have something to do with some kind of healing centers,
Mm.
which I do think it's interesting that we don't really know what those shafts are made out of. If they're made of just stone, maybe they could be metallic. I mean, who knows? But it does look like they had some kind of coils around them. It does kind of work with the idea that they had something to do with power. But yeah, it's really incredible that I want to say that the Great Pyramid's about 500 feet, and so like these pillars or whatever they are four times as big as the pyramid.
Mhm.
That's interesting because I mean, I was just talking. Actually, I just did a live stream with my buddy Brian, who was my partner on the movie, and we were both saying like that. That's really interesting that they'd be saying that out loud because I don't think they can push that nonsense about how they claim the pyramids were made in that same kind of way with something that's that massive that's under the ground. I mean, like it does. I mean, it leads people to believe, yeah, that aliens had to do it. Something else had to do it.
Yeah.
It had to be some kind of supernatural thing. It had to be either that or it had to have. They must have had some technology that we're not aware of, which obviously they did anyways. Because I think the mainstream narrative story about how they built the pyramids anyways makes no sense. But it almost feels like to me like that they could not even try to float that idea anymore because it would be ridiculous. Yeah, thinking like these things are bigger than like the One World Trade Center in United States, like in New York City.
Are you talking about the
So
buried
it's like
part?
yeah, the buried
Yeah.
things that those pillars are taller than the tallest skyscrapers in America. It's unreal.
Yeah, and they were
There's
picking up.
eight of them, right?
Yeah, right. And they were picking up some sort of a that was, I don't know if it's tubing or piping or maybe a staircase or for them to get down in there and do stuff. Who knows what that spiral is, but I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting too. It's obviously functional. It serves a purpose.
I mean, it doesn't seem like you wouldn't do that unless it did something. I mean, especially eight of them. That's why I said I wonder if it had something to do with what if they were going down to some kind of water down there because that would make sense if it did have something to do with either healing or power.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope this pans out to be true, a true story, and that will I hope they don't just block it off like they do everything else, like they do with Petra. They won't even let you go in down in there. Like there's all these uh underground tunnels under Petra. That place is interesting too. That was they lie about that place too. That was a was Herod was a who was Esau? Edomite. He was there was
Yeah,
an
the
Edomite
Edom.
stronghold.
Yeah, if you actually look in the Bible, I think it makes references to it talks about the fortified city, and
Yeah.
that makes sense that that's that place.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, man. And I think they were storing, I think that was another one of these places where they were storing knowledge personally, like throughout the ages, like they probably had a lot of riches there and a lot
Yeah,
of knowledge there, like records and stuff, because it's one of the most defensible places on earth. And it's got
it's
all
a
this,
unreal,
it's
unreal.
unreal. And like they say, I don't remember the name there was a Bedouin tribe that ended up settling there at one point. the mainstream people say that the Bedouins built that,
Yeah,
but
it makes no sense.
it
Yeah,
makes
some
no sense.
nomadic people built that.
Yeah.
Like how does that make any sense? I mean, I think what seems plain and obvious, um, that the climate, the ground, all the things around those places is 100% different than when that was built.
Absolutely.
Because it's like you would build that in the middle of some kind of dusty desert where you couldn't really farm and do all the, like, what did they eat when they were
JT, they
there?
had toilets there. They had ancient toilets there. It was
There was so much, it
royalty.
was so there was so much different than it used to be. I just like there's no way it was like that. And yeah, it makes no sense that somebody would just stumble upon that place and just start carving out mountains.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
retarded.
And there was a story that came out of there recently where they saw. So if you're, everybody remembers the scene from Indiana Jones and
Oh yeah.
that main, like you're talking about, it's a building carved into a mountain. It's very ornate.
Mhm.
It looks like there's like a little natural courtyard out there in front of it, right? And they there was a sinkhole or something that happened there, and they started excavating it, and you could see there's a picture online they took of it, and you could see that there's a tunnel, a very elaborate tunnel system down there. And they've got that blocked off. They put like if you've ever been in New York City and you're walking down the sidewalk and they have those air vents,
Mhm.
they put that grid type of thing on there, like like a whatever it's called, like a grate. They put one of those over it, and they won't let anybody down there. It's like, what are you hiding here? Obviously, they're hiding something, and it's not the Bedouins who did this. It was people they had one of the most advanced irrigation systems. They somehow figured out a way to reroute water in the middle of this desert to have a constant natural little flowing stream throughout Petra. And then they had these toilets, and then it was obvious that people who were like royalty were living there. And it looks like around the time when Herod built the temple that he had his Masons or Knights Templar or his version of that guarding that place. So this is what excites me about talking to you and like just talking about this kind of stuff is like we're on the verge of so many discoveries here. I hope this stuff blows the lid off of what people think they know. Maybe what even I think I know, like this
Right.
pyramid
Hmm.
thing. I hope this, you could get into inner Earth. Who knows what was happening down there?
Yeah, I think that to me, my first reaction to the pyramid thing, because when I didn't know like maybe how big those things were, I was kind of just like, well, of course there's things under the pyramids. There's things under everything. I
Mm-hmm.
In all the research I've done, there's tunnels under everything. I mean, like everything. All around America, all around that region. You get into like places like Turkey. There's places with like cities under the ground where like 20,000 people could stay. I mean, the real question to me is, did those used to be tunnels? Or was these structures that were covered up by the earth? I mean, that's like the mud flood theory and all whatever that was, which I don't think it's really a theory. There's sediment layers up to, well, maybe not up to. In many cases, it's 45 feet deep. There's things under the earth that have been buried. I mean, all of ancient Rome had to be excavated. I mean, it's really crazy they don't teach us that in school, but if you look in just in North America, under almost every major city, there's these elaborate tunnel systems. It makes no sense if you look at the timeline of when these cities were constructed. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, of course, to me, there would obviously be tunnels under that because there's tunnels under everywhere.
Hmm.
Like, but they don't talk about it. Even like you were saying, New York City, I think it's really suspect that like places like New York City have like these large areas of abandoned subways, supposedly subway systems. Like, like it's kind of like that somehow the railroads got overbuilt in America and somehow the subways got overbuilt in New York City. Does that make any sense?
No,
It seems
no.
like really a lot of trouble went to making those things. So,
They've got tunnels under Central Park there. This is what I've been told by somebody who used to work for the city there. They had to go down, and there were tunnels under Central Park not being used that were like 50 to 100 feet underground. And this person was talking about how that's just a little blip. Like that's just one example. He said that these tunnels run under the whole city. What's that for? What was that for?
That's a great question. That's what I'm saying. It's like I think it's funny, like you watch movies and stuff and you see them going like down these abandoned parts of these cities under the ground, and you just don't think anything of it until you become an adult and you realize like that's really big down there. Like that's really strange. Like that people were told in like a more primitive time would have done that, only to do nothing with it. It makes no
No.
sense to me. But like that story's consistent with everywhere. Like you see, like places like Atlanta, it's got an underground section of it. Well, it's really small, so nobody really thinks of it. But it's like, but that's only the part they show you. Places like Seattle have an underground part, and it's kind of small, but
Oh yeah.
I think it likely goes under the whole footprint of the city. Like
Yeah.
this is consistent, and you have like kind of these old world buildings in places like Chicago, and you hear from the people who work there, yeah, there's tunnel systems that link all the buildings together. That's really weird that they used to do this all the time, and now we do nothing like that. I don't know. It's like to me that um I guess if a normie heard there's stuff under the pyramids, they'd probably be blown away, and they would just say, "Oh, well, there's a lot of interesting things under Egypt," but they don't understand that there's interesting things under their own feet,
Yeah.
probably where they live. If they live in the city.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull up this picture here. I want to show you this. Because you mentioned Seattle. And I'm like, I'm everything you're saying right now, I'm resonating with. Have you seen this picture before?
Yeah, that's absolutely bonkers. Like, what was going on then?
Yeah, and I know we're talking about tunnels, but this is supposedly Seattle before it was built. But if you look closely in the background, you'll see this shapes like this. That looks like a little building. This is obviously a building, and it looks like a modern building too at that.
Yeah.
But these mounts, and okay, look down here at the bottom too. You see how there's layers of sediment there,
Yeah.
and the more I looked at this picture, the more I realized this looks like rubble, like they were
Yeah.
tearing into some sort of a structure that was down there, and like I don't know, like if there was a building underneath this mound, it looks like they went down in there and they, did away with it.
Yeah. What I see is they were excavating this place.
Mm.
I think that's what I've come to believe. I mean, I know you can never prove this, but just like if you can look up pictures of like the Colosseum from like the earliest pictures we have of that, there's the same kind of mounds around it. And yeah, and like people just don't mention the fact that Rome was buried, like good portions of it. I mean, that's the funny thing is like,
Yes.
specifically in Rome and all over Europe, they accidentally discover Roman things all the time. It's like it's comical that they accidentally discover Roman buildings, Roman cities under the ground. And nobody even stops to wonder how a city got buried, like fully.
Yeah.
I mean, and then I mean, like, so literally, we have built our civilization on top of an older one, but the history books don't write about that. So then you look all, I mean, I would say that the best evidence of the kind of stuff we're talking about here in America is the West Coast, because not because this is not consistent all around the whole country, but it's more consistent with like, well, it's less feasible. I mean, the idea that there's tunnels under old cities like New York is really, people could say, well, I don't know, they could justify it because people have been living in New York City for a long time. But when you see like timelines like places like Seattle, like nobody lived there like in the 1870s. It was like basically nobody lived there. And then before you know it, like Seattle looks like it does today. And how did that happen? And the idea that it burned down, it flooded, and blah blah blah, and then they built on top of the older city in still again this very short time span. And what we're taught is that people like miners and people like that were going out there, so they had the ability to build cities twice, and they were very resilient because all their places burned down, and then they just have these underground sections of it.
Yeah.
It's comical. Again, like Portland's another good example of that. I think they call it the Shanghai tunnels under Portland.
Oh, I didn't know
Obviously,
about that.
bunch of shady stuff was going on. There were people getting
Ooh,
kidnapped, and
yeah.
well, a lot of times
I think they're in Utah too, man. That's
oh, I'm sure they're every. I mean, I'm
yeah.
telling you, they're literally everywhere. But specifically, you have places like that, and they talk about prohibition and things like that. Oh, well, they were used for smuggling booze or whatever. Well, I mean, I'm sure after these tunnel,
Yeah.
once people realized these tunnels existed, they were used for whatever shady reasons they wanted them to use them for, human trafficking and everything. But
They
that's
were
not why those. That's not
repurposed.
why they were built, though.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
They were
they
totally
were already
repurposed.
they were already there.
They were already there, and yeah, I mean, we have our work cut out for us as to the why. I mean, let me tell you about Nashville, man. We have those tunnels in Nashville. People who have lived here for a long time, everybody knows about the tunnels. Now, there used to be an entrance that you could go down there and explore, and it's underneath Vanderbilt. So I think all these college kids were going down there, and they eventually just blocked it off. Like they have a locked gate down there now. You can't get in. But anyways, a couple maybe a year or two ago, I was doing some research, and I was looking at old Civil War stuff, and I came across this old newspaper. It's not in print anymore. It's called Ages and the Intelligencer. And I saw there was an article there that said Nashville. It said subterranean Nashville. I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I read the article. Now, this was about 4 or 5 years, if I remember, after the Civil War was over. So they were kind of, it looked like, it seemed to me like they were looking around at some of these entrances to these old tunnels that had been blown open, or maybe the army was using them or something. But what's interesting is they're describing what's in these tunnels, and they were talking about how there was a sarcophagus in there. They were talking about how this is in Nashville, Tennessee, a sarcophagus. There was huge vases with Eastern, some foreign language on them, and all this other. Oh, they like knives with like strange engravings on the handles and stuff. But here's the thing: like they said, the tunnel went for at least a mile underground, and the tunnel came out or ended at Fort Negley, which is a star fort.
Oh, really? That's really
Yes.
interesting.
So
That's really interesting.
this whole article, it blew my mind, and like the people in the article were talking about how, yeah, there was an ancient, they said ancient race here. There was an ancient race here, and this is evidence of their ancient civilization. So if this article is at all true, um, there was Nashville's been around for a long time, guys. It's just not been called Nashville. This is like an ancient city here.
Yeah. What's kind of funny too is that another Tennessee city is Memphis, right? And so then you have Memphis, Egypt, which was like the capital of Egypt at one point. So Memphis, Tennessee, and then I think it's funny you have the Bass Pro Shop. It's like the 10th
Yeah.
largest pyramid in the whole world there.
Yeah.
But what's funny is like you also had what is it? Was it a centennial celebration in Nashville? I think in like the might have been 18 whatever
18
like
1897 maybe. I
yes,
haven't.
something like that. It was like 100 years in the Union or something.
Hmm.
And yeah, when they built out the Parthenon and they built a pyramid and all this stuff, and of course, supposedly it was all temporary, which
Right.
I think it's really, really sus that they built a temporary Parthenon that's life size there. And then the people liked it so much. This is the story they say. They liked it so much that they tore the temporary one down and they built a real one. And it makes no sense. Yeah, like there's literally a Parthenon in Nashville and they built that. Yeah, I don't know. I
No,
mean,
I know, man. I
there's
love
something really
this.
weird. There's something really weird about that I don't know why anybody believes this stuff. I just can't wrap my mind around it.
I love this the centennial stuff. I'm glad you brought it up. Here's like the pamphlet for it. And you could see there's the Parthenon he's talking about there. And you could see these people, they have all these like, my thing is not wanting to work with me today here. I can't blow it up for some reason, but you can see there's all this ancient stuff. It looks like, artifacts and stuff. There's like an Asian symbol of some sort there on it's eclectic, right? There,
Yeah.
and I think that they were finding artifacts here personally, and I think that fueled a lot of these decisions. Like like they seem to be like infatuated with Egypt because they built this pyramid. I think you mentioned that. Here it is.
Yeah.
Here's a
Mm.
picture of it. So they built that, or they tore it down, and there's no explanation.
Yeah, that's really weird. I mean, it's funny that in all these, World Fair type things, they always built really Roman things, but that's one of the rare instances where you see they built a pyramid. It's like it was all Greco-Roman stuff
Hmm.
they built. It's almost like that was already here.
It's almost like it was already here. And this
Yeah.
is wild too, man. I got to show you this one. So this is to the left, this picture is that pyramid. They also built this, or they said they built this little building. It's called the Pythian building. And I looked into it, and it's like a secret society of some sort. There's not a lot about it on the internet. Um, but look at this tower back here, man. Do you see that? Looks like a radio tower.
Yeah.
What was
Uh-huh.
that doing there?
It was probably all lit up. I mean, that's the thing. It's like the electricity was brand new, but they were like obviously they lit everything up in these places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's pictures of it at night. Really interesting. I mean, that pyramid looks like it's pretty big because that Parthenon is not small.
Mm-mm.
It's actually really big. Like when you see it, I think isn't there a Athena's in there
Yeah.
now? They put a statue in there, and I want to say it's like 36 feet tall.
Oh, it's 48 or 49
Oh,
feet
is it? Is
tall.
that
Yeah,
big? Yeah, I
it's
mean, it's
huge.
huge, huge.
It's like being it's not even like being in another country in Europe. It's like being somewhere further off the beaten path. It's just so exotic, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
Hmm.
it's this tall goddess. She's decked out in gold. She's holding Nike, that
Yeah.
goddess, a
Hmm.
little
The
Nike.
god of victory. Hmm.
There's serpent iconography. There's stuff in there that guys like you and me could like pick apart for an hour in that one
It's
room.
it's to me the story of the United States really makes hardly any sense because I just don't see that in that time period, which the United States would have been by and large a very Christian country back then, churches everywhere, right? We're told that basically the founding fathers were Christians, but they were really deists. But at the same time, if I imagine that places like Nashville would have been pretty conservative, and the idea that they were going to build some temple to some false god in there. I don't know. It just it seems unbelievable to me that people would say, "You're going to spend tax money on what? On that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nah, we're not going to do that." And what's another interesting thing is I know we just played recently. We played a video on that podcast you mentioned, my JT's mixtape. That there was an old book about this temple that got flooded in Tennessee. I'm not sure what dam it was, but yeah, like they had this old temple, and I think the people mentioned it might have some kind of connection with Egypt, but they weren't really sure. I think,
Yeah. So I think scholars, maybe from Oxford, I'm a little hazy on the details, came in and looked at it, and they said they thought it was an old Egyptian temple. And some of those guys said it dated back to Göbekli Tepe or older. Now imagine that. Like we're told Göbekli Tepe is like the oldest site
yeah, hmm
on Earth. Now these guys were saying there's one as old or older in Tennessee. And what did they do? They told them you have like a couple of days to finish up your excavation, and we're gonna dump concrete in this. Basically, they built a dam. The TVA, I guess it's called. The whole area is called Lake or Tellico Lake now. Um, it was just a river flowing through there, and I want to do a whole episode on this one day because I went and looked into that Tellico Lake region. There were 7 Cherokee cities along that river there that are all flooded now. But here's the thing, the Cherokee, when they settled there, they settled on top of the ruins of some ancient civilization, for
yeah,
sure.
that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, I know that some people might get upset me saying this. I've said it on my podcast a couple of times. I think what the history we're taught about the Native Americans, quote unquote Native Americans, I think it's fiction. I'm not saying there wasn't nomadic people who lived here, but it seems pretty crazy to me You had all these people who lived here much longer than us, and they had no structures. They built nothing. That seems really hard to believe for me. I think that the people who were here before the Europeans, our forefathers, I believe it was a multi-ethnic people that were here,
Yeah.
and I think they lived in cities. Maybe some of these cities were kind of like abandoned, but I mean, I'm kind of coming to that conclusion that yeah, it makes sense that there was things here before anybody got here.
Yeah, well, the rumor is about one of those Cherokee cities down there. I think it was Sitico or Sitiku is what they called it. It apparently it had streets. I've heard it had paved streets from some accounts, and they had buildings there. It was like a proper city. Now, did the Cherokee build that? I don't know, but because all the Native American legends, like you say, if you look at them, they all say no. Most of this stuff was here when we got here. It points back to an ancient race, like that article said. But here's the thing: I agree with you. That ancient race was probably multi-ethnic, like you're
Yeah.
saying. I mean, that's why in the Nashville article you've got a sarcophagus, you got something from basically Egypt, and then you have these other items down there that didn't have Egyptian hieroglyphs on them. They had some other language. They look like Greek or something, right? And then you've got the when you look at the old ships they found on the Mississippi, you've got it looks like the Phoenicians were here. There's evidence that the Minoans were here. I have an old article or a new article about how they just found a Canaanite ship that's 3,400 years old. So the Canaanites were probably coming over here too, and the
Well, that's
Amorites.
interesting because a lot of people have connected, like the Phoenicians would have been Canaanites. Like that
Hmm.
maybe sometimes maybe it's just a semantic issue, but I mean I think some people have connected the Philistines
Hmm.
as being Phoenicians because they were known, I think, to the Egyptians as sea people.
Yeah,
It's kind of interesting.
it
But I
is.
mean, I don't think that the mainstream history is trying to corroborate things that are biblical.
No.
So that's probably why we don't get told that. It's interesting too, as I did along when I was focused on TikTok and I was making lots of videos. I did quite a few videos about the Hoover Dam, and I thought it was really interesting when I found out when they created the Hoover Dam, Lake Mead flooded out. I don't even know how many acres. I mean, like ridiculous amount of stuff. But supposedly there was an Anasazi city under there, and so Anasazi means ancient ones. And I think like the Hopi and the Pueblo Indians, I believe they claim ancestry back to the Anasazi. Well, the city that was flooded there, they said there were structures that were up to 100 rooms in there. So like I know when I originally thought a city, like kind of a Native American city, I'm thinking like mud huts. But if something had 100 rooms in it, that's not a mud hut. That's a legit building. So what's under there? I mean, and the thing I'm saying is not a conspiracy because you can look it up. I think it might be even like lakemead.gov. Like there's a story that'll tell you that because I read it straight off their website. I was like, whoa, that's insane. So I mean, like the Anasazi, we're told, was this civilization that was here 1,000 years before basically anybody got here, and they just disappeared. That's really weird. That's really weird. So I mean, so there was obviously things here, and I think that if you go out west, there is like cliff dwellings and weird stuff like that, and the Anasazi is always given credit for it, but I don't know. To me, it seems strange that if there wasn't things out east that people built, because if there's things that are 1,000 years old out west, why wouldn't there be things here on the eastern part
Oh
of the
yeah.
United States?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of evidence. This is where it's hard to explain this to people because I think you have giants in the mix. It's hard to convince some people of that. I think that a lot of these people we're talking about who predate the Native Americans were possibly giants. I mean, they said that they were
Well, yeah, if you
giants.
ask them, that's what they'll say.
So, there's that. And then there you have to kind of go into this idea that there may have been a cover up. And I think that there was. I mean, there was a guy who worked for the Smithsonian. His name is John Wesley Powell. One of the things very interesting guy, man. Like he was a part, just a side note, he was a part of what's called the Cosmos Club. If you ever get a wild hair, look into that. Their building is still in Washington, D.C. It looks like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, like X-Men
Oh
type
gosh.
place. It's still
Hmm.
there. He was a part of this weird, and I think they had like an airship society there of some sort. But he was like one of these elite guys who worked for the Smithsonian who had his hands in all these different pies. One of the things he was tasked with was like directing the railway, like where they're going to build the railroads. And when you look into it, the story, he blazes right through these ancient sites and they demolish them and put a railroad through there. And it's almost like they did that intentionally. Like they wanted to clean up. They wanted to, manifest destiny, right? That's what I think Tellico Lake and the dam there and the old temple there and why that's all underwater today. I think that falls under this uh great idea that people had to cover things up for manifest destiny. Like we need these people to look like savages so we can justify coming in here and taking their land.
That makes sense to me. It wasn't Powell was also the one who named all the temples in the Grand Canyon, all the rock formations, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, he was the one who did. So obviously, if you go, there's another real famous dam in Utah. I forgot what that one's called, but it created Lake Powell. As a kid, my family went up there and we stayed on a houseboat for a week there. Really amazing place. But yeah, so there's all kinds
Is
of
that Arizona?
that's in Utah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, that's in Utah. And so I think that there's also other cities that are under Lake Powell. Really, it's a real. I mean, if you believe in other planets like the way that you're taught, that place looks like another one.
Oh,
Like
so
some of those places out
yeah.
there just look so crazy with all the limestone and just weird rock formations.
I was thinking about Lake Powell, like it's either Lake Powell that you're talking about, or it's another lake very similar to it that where they filmed the Planet of the Apes movie because it looks like it's another planet out there.
I believe it. There was another place we went. Um, I met my buddy Brian, who like I said, I'm partners with on quite a few ventures. But my wife and I went out to Vegas, and there's a place called the Valley of Fire, probably about little under an hour outside of Vegas, and that's one of those places that looks like it's been melted.
Hmm.
And you go and just like the rocks and just the weird things you just it does not look like real life when you go there.
Mm.
And there's, I think, I want to say it was called Domes, White Domes is the trail. And there's a sign of all the Hollywood movies that were filmed there because
Okay.
it's like, this is if you wanted to make a movie about Mars, film it here because
Yeah.
that's what you could imagine it would look like.
I think there's multiple ways that they erased these sites. And I think railways was just one way. I think the dams for sure was another way. Because I've looked into the numbers for the dams, which is really strange. It's hard to get like a real clear cut number for dams. Um, I think what I saw was upwards to 85,000 in North America. And then I was looking for a worldwide number of dams, and the number I kept getting was 60,000 worldwide, but yet they're saying we have like 89,000
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
So,
I just looked it up. I just looked it up because I've probably misquoted a stat because I knew I heard that like 90% of the dams in the world were in the United States, and then I looked it up, and then they said there was a lot more in China. But it says that in 2022 there was nearly 92,000 dams in the United States.
so
What?
that
Like that seems
crazy.
it seems almost impossible. I don't even know how that even works.
That seems, look, I can kind of get behind that number because we are the United States. We should have a good handle on how many dams are here. It seems like the worldwide number was a little off.
Yeah.
Or if the worldwide number was real, that means we have 90,000 of them here compared to the rest of the world who has less than 90,000. But anyways, like I don't know what's up with the numbers there, but okay, let's say we have 90,000 dams here. Those that could account for tons of ancient sites.
Yeah, that's 90,000 lakes, right?
Yeah.
to like, yeah, what's under those lakes?
Right.
All those valleys that were flooded. Yeah, I mean, there's just really no telling. I mean, but yeah, like that, we already know that just based on not being conspiratorial, we know that there's ancient cities under there. In Tennessee, there's an ancient temple under there. But yeah, the normies have no idea about any of that stuff. They don't care, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just like the Star Fort thing, man. It's like I have fun with this at work.
The star
Um,
forts are fascinating.
they're fascinating, and I was going when I found out about them a couple years ago. I was going around to all like my quote normie friends. I love them, but they're not into this stuff. So, and I was asking them, "Have you ever heard of a Star Fort?" Nobody had ever heard of them. People just because it wasn't talked about in school. There's I don't know if there's a documentary out now or not, but there's not in any of the documentaries. It's like this strange, bizarre, really interesting element of our past, star forts, has never been talked about. And why is that? Why is that? But they're all over the place. People don't even know
You
there's
would
one in
think that we'd be
Nashville.
taught about them because they're so impressive. Because I mean, I think
Yeah.
that when you do learn a little bit about them, yeah, it's something that should be in the history books because they are like incredible feats of engineering, and not just the structure. Because literally, those things are like the lane is terraformed to create them. So not only did they create the most elaborate like brick and stone structures you could ever imagine, but yeah, literally the ground is terraformed to form this. And a lot of times, in many cases, they have like canals around them. I mean, and they did this when, how? I think that's why they don't tell you about it because, well, for one, there's the when is wrong, and the how is definitely wrong. So I think that they just rather just not talk about it.
That's why I love that article so much. Like just I'm like so grateful that I ran into that strange article about Nashville because that kind of points to this too, that these star forts are older, like they predate the modern era. They go back to an older time or something.
Have you ever read John Levi's book? You know John Levi's on YouTube. He's a really got a great
No.
channel as far as like kind of like lost history. He read a book called Evidence of the Old World.
Okay. I haven't read that. I'm gonna check it out though.
Yeah, you should definitely check it out. It mostly centers around San Francisco.
Nice.
And the beginning of the book kind of talks about how San Francisco is on older maps, like from like the 1500s. And but which is a problem for this narrative because supposedly San Francisco was not discovered by the Spanish until 1776. So it appears on maps over 200 years before it was ever discovered. It's literally on there saying San Francisco, like in that area. And so he goes on to talk about some of these maps from the 1500s. Well, you said before that you were from North Carolina, so I'm sure you're aware of the lost colony of Roanoke Island. So where I'm at in Virginia, we're really close to Jamestown, which is the first permanent British settlement in the country. It would have been Roanoke Island, but we don't know what happened to them. That's why they call them the lost colony. But John Smith, I believe he was the head guy at in Roanoke Island, and the story goes that he went back to Great Britain for supplies, and he doesn't come back for 3 years. I guess that's kind of weird to me, but he doesn't come back for 3 years, and when he gets back, there's no one there. That's the story. What happened to him? Was it giants? Did they all die of some kind of thing? I don't know. Was it just Native Americans killed them? We don't really know. That's really not important for this story because the interesting part was that John Smith, while he was there, he was working on maps. So he mapped the area very accurately. And so what was really interesting is they have this really old map. I think it's from like 1515 or 1517, somewhere in that range. And there's a river that kind of comes out to where the colony was, and it forks at one point. And there was a patch over this old map, and somebody used lidar or some kind of, I'm not exactly sure how what the kind of means they did to look under what the patch was, and under the patch was a star fort.
Was
Now if you think about it, so this would have been before Jamestown. We know that those people didn't build the star fort,
right.
so the star fort was already there. And if the star fort was already there, well, then who built it and when?
Mhm.
Like that. I mean, it makes sense to me that technology, whatever those things were used for, they're called bastion forts, is what the mainstream calls them. But it's funny, like so there's star forts in a lot of places. Another one, I think maybe one of the reasons they talk about that is because there was actually one called Fort San Francisco. Also makes no sense when they built it. And there's several, even like actually even where I live, there's one of the biggest ones in America. I think it's called Fort Monroe, and it's on the water. Makes no sense. So like in America, they just put a couple cannons on them and they say that they were forts,
Right.
but they're so elaborate. But if you actually look up like the basically how successful they were, they were terrible. So like there are these very elaborate structures that failed when they were attacked enough. So what is that really what they were used for? And I think that some people who have done this kind of research, they think that the star fort had something to do with, again, energy. That's why it has this certain geometric pattern. That's why there's moats and water around them. I think,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm willing to believe anything besides what they tell us because, like, when you look at how many bricks were involved in these structures and when they were built, the worst one I think is, you ever heard of Fort Jefferson? That's off the coast of Florida.
Is it like way out in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah, it's like 70 miles outside off the coast of Florida,
Yeah, I
and
think I
it's
know.
on this tiny little island. That basically the whole fort is this island, and yeah, there's not even fresh water in this place, and they say it was built in, like, I guess, the late 1800s.
Okay.
Makes no sense. It's actually, I think they say it's the largest masonry structure as far as the number of bricks in the whole Western Hemisphere, and supposedly it was built by like prisoners and slaves and whatever else. And
Yeah, yeah.
it was basically abandoned almost before it was even completed. Like I said, if you believe that, I mean, there's not much I can do
No,
for you.
no. That's a weird one, man, that they would put that out there in the middle of the ocean. I mean, that's 70 miles offshore. What's the point?
And it's also that around the same time, what we're told is, I forgot, they called it I forgot, there was some kind of strategic planning where they were putting these things out there, these bastion forts, is what we're told, and it had something to do with like the War of 1812 because we were fighting the British. But this is literally on like the interior side of the Gulf. So it's not even like who would have attacked from that kind of vantage point? I
Mm.
have no idea.
Yeah, look at this place. It it's amazing.
Yeah, it's like 70 miles off of Key West, I think.
Yeah.
So it's way out there. And again, there's no fresh water there.
Yeah, and I mean just the sheer number of bricks that it would
I
take.
think it was like 16 million or something like that.
It's
Might even more than that.
it's like who built that? How did they have the resources and the time?
And look at it. Look how it goes right up to the water right there.
Hmm.
It's like, who was doing that?
I this one's a head scratcher for me.
No, I mean, I made a short on that, and it was pretty successful. And I did like some people's conclusions, like was what if there wasn't water between Florida and there when that thing was built?
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. That okay.
That
I
makes
and
more sense. That makes more sense to me. If
Yeah.
not, the people who built it were really, really advanced. Could be either one.
I can see that actually because something happened. I believe something happened with the water. Like, you've got the old maps. I'm thinking the probably 1500s is the one I looked at somewhere, and it had a California as an island.
Yeah, that's really interesting too.
So that would suggest that things were a little bit different with water lines and all that. And like I looked into Antarctica and I don't remember the proper name for this map. I usually call it the Terra Australis map. But you look at that map, you look at the very bottom of South America, there's like a little strip of water between Antarctica and South America.
Yeah,
And yet they say that at the time when this map was made, nobody knew what Antarctica was.
Yeah, it wasn't supposedly was not discovered until the 1800s,
Yeah,
right?
right, exactly. So, but there's just little strip of water in between the two. So it looks like at one point South America and Antarctica either touched or, they almost touched,
Yeah. Hmm.
which is interesting because that brings up you think about the Perry Reese map.
Hmm.
That seems to show the South American coastline going all the way down to Antarctica, like that it was just one solid landmass. It kind of suggests that, and that the temperatures down there were different and everything.
Yeah, I can believe that. I mean, it's sort of funny that they think we're told about climate change all the time, and they're always talking about how the water levels are going to rise and things are going to change, and you know, they're always predicting impending doom. It seems really strange that that would never have happened in our recent past, that coastlines could change, right?
Yeah, right.
I
Hmm.
mean, I think to me that seems really obvious. I think that there's lots of things under the water. I think what do they call that? Is it the Bimini Road off Florida
Yeah.
that some people have said, well, maybe that was Atlantis. And I don't think that was Atlantis. I think that was just something that was probably above the water and now it's not. There's lots of things like that all around the world. I think that it seems obvious to me that yeah, that the coastlines have changed
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's I mean, I believe it's so the Greeks had the mythologies about Atlantis. There was somewhere off of I guess the what is it the Rock of Gibraltar, what do they call them? Like that's where they the Pillars of Hercules. So it'd be somewhere out in the Atlantic, and then the people in the Pacific had these legends of this place called Lemuria,
Hmm.
right? And it was a real similar story.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it makes sense that there was something out there because you have places like Easter Island. It's so remote. Even the Hawaiian Islands are very remote if you think about it. Like makes sense that there was another landmass out there is because the Pacific is kind of unusual that it's so big compared to all the other oceans of the world. Maybe there was more land out that way. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, all those people, whoever they were, the people who built like Easter Island and stuff, there's a lot of evidence that they came over here or they came to South America too, big time. Like, there's a guy I had on his name. He goes by Pillars of the Past on Instagram. He he goes out and he goes to these remote places in Peru, and he finds all these ancient, undocumented ancient structures, cities. I mean, what the guy's found is he's like one of the best kept secrets on the internet for sure. He's just going out there and finding like undocumented ancient civilizations, and some of the places he goes are documented, and I was looking into some of them, and I was just kind of looking into the ancient or the legends that those people had, like their mythologies and stuff, and all those people on the coastline of the on the Pacific side of South America, they all had legends that their people came from the across the ocean.
Yeah. All the mythologies, and I think that's why I said when we did ancient angels, it's all about that kind of stuff because the when you actually hear the real stories that people told, they're really interesting. Even like the whole idea of like Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, this being that came over and he was a man, described as a man, a white man with a
Yeah,
beard. And they, this person claimed he came from some place that flooded. That's really
yeah.
weird. That's really weird. He taught these people all kinds of stuff. I mean, like that legend is, again, it's like too crazy to make up. Like, why would they make that up?
And it's you see that legend just duplicated in all these other, it's all the flood legend is everywhere. You can't get away from that. And too, like with like Cusco and the blocks, the megalithic walls there. There's an identical wall on Easter Island. So it just makes sense that they came from there, you
Yeah,
know.
that's interesting you say that too, because they don't often reference any kind of structures on Easter Island. They really only talk about the Moai.
They won't talk about that wall. They pick and choose. And like going back to something we talked about earlier, the Moai, those are the ones that were buried up to their necks, right? Now we're
Yeah.
finding out that there's a hole, and it's like what's underneath that though?
Right. What's under all the ground? I
Yeah.
mean, maybe there's stone and everything under. Maybe they were placed on stone. Maybe they were never placed on dirt. I mean,
Hmm.
I think to me, just like going back to talking about the pyramids, I think it's ridiculous that they didn't know things were buried under them, under the pyramids until now. If that's true, I mean, I obviously am skeptical that they didn't already know all that stuff, but I think it's comical that they said they just realized very recently that they have bodies. Like nobody to stop to see like how far down they go. Like wouldn't you have done that early on? Like you could say, "Hey, do you think these things are cut off at the very ground level? Let's just see." You would probably immediately say, "I wonder how far down they go." Because obviously there's no base here.
Right. Right.
The things
I think that whoever looked wasn't allowed to talk about it probably.
yeah, I think again that's something they obviously knew because an idiot could realize that they were not that wasn't the bottom of it. So how far down does it go?
Yeah, yeah.
Some
It's like
pe-
when you're excavating it, you didn't think to like to dig down and see what was, let's see if there's more stone down here below ground. Like
right.
somebody could have at least looked 2 feet down there.
Yeah, I think that they obviously dug down. They found out very early, and they just only told us recently
Yeah, yeah.
because it's ridiculous to think they didn't know. But yeah, so then why don't they talk about the other things on Easter Island? I think the reason why I was really fascinated back in the day with watching Ancient Aliens, I never found their conclusions very satisfying. I thought they were really dumb, but I never heard about all these places, and I think that that's why the show was interesting to me because I'd never seen about megalithic things all over, like you're saying in Cusco, and the stuff in South America was mind blowing.
Yeah,
Like
it's like Chariots of the Gods for me. Like I love that documentary. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I'm sure you
yeah,
have.
I've seen it because I kind of got into all that stuff
Yeah.
when I was watching, and I was just saying like that I couldn't get enough of like all the megaliths. It was
Yeah.
so interesting. Like who
Hmm.
did this?
Yeah.
And so I thought that the show did a good job of asking questions and poking holes in the mainstream narrative. Again, I don't agree with their conclusions, but I think yeah, again, like people do have to wrestle with that. If like we're taught that men had this very linear progression, right? They came out of caves and then they became hunter gatherers and then they learned how to farm. And then they just built the craziest thing you've ever seen in your whole life right after that. Because that's basically when they say ancient Egypt started, right?
Hmm.
They immediately started building pyramids before doing that was like the first cities they made. I mean, it makes no sense because you can obviously tell just based on even the way that the empires are written about in the Bible that there was peaks and there's valleys. Like, I mean, obviously, again, there's a worldwide valley and it's called the flood. And it's not just Christian people who talk about the flood. It's the flood mythos is everywhere. Everyone talked about all around the world. There was a time when gods were here. There was a time with giants, and then there was a giant flood.
Yeah.
And then you could see like why people would not know about the things. Like so that's not a reason that doesn't give you a lot of answers about the pre-flood stuff, but it gives you a reason why we don't know more about it.
Sure, sure. I mean,
We
that's
know that
why
we know the big parts of it.
right, right. That's why I'm like flirting around with this idea that some of this technology goes back to the Garden of Eden and Cain brought it with him when he left. Because it's I'm a Christian, so I like that it kind of parallels with what the Bible's telling us that idea does. And but also it's like for a long time there, I thought that maybe this information came out of Genesis 6 and the Watchers, because we know they came down and they gave
Hmm.
man technology too. But I think it goes back before that now to the garden. And who knows how long ago that was, like that might explain why the pyramids are so much older. Like and like we said before, I think you said that like we were talking about how they're pre-flood, right? Because
Yeah.
Dr. Robert Schoch talks about all that water damage on the Sphinx.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's probably goes back to this flood that we're talking about, right? Or or
Yeah, I think
could.
so.
Yeah, yeah. So and I don't know where I was going with that, other than, I think you can find answers for this stuff in the old texts and especially the Bible. I know people don't want to hear that, but for me in my research, the Bible stands up time and time again, like when you put it to the test. Like you
Oh
think
yeah.
about all the stuff that's in there. If you read through the Old Testament, if you've never read it before, read through it. You're going to be blown away by the accuracy of it's like a map. They tell you, they're like, oh, we went to this river, then we went, you know, up to this town, and then we turned and we went to this mountain range, and then over the mountain range we went to this other town, and they tell you the names of all these places, and those are real places. A lot of those
Yeah.
valleys and those wadis, they're the same name as they were back then. It checks out.
Well, I've actually the research I've done recently, and I've done some timeline stuff. I think that the reason why the Bible's so accurate is like it's literally the oldest history book we have, and I think it's been used to corroborate things. I know that the modern history people would not like to hear that, but yeah, there's certain things in the Bible that they would try to debunk, and they would say, "Oh, the Hittites were not in this region," and then they find evidence that they were. There's lots of
Yeah.
things in the Old Testament that are like that. But yeah, I do believe that. Yeah, if you go into the Book of Enoch, it mentions that the Watchers taught men how to do things. And if you've ever seen that movie, that Marvel movie, The Eternals, you ever seen that one?
I don't think so, actually.
It's really not all that good, but
Okay.
it's interesting. It's interesting for this, but like so in that movie it comes from obviously a comic book, The Eternals. Who are the Eternals? They're angels, right? So like these angels are supposed to come down and they're supposed to help humanity, but they're not supposed to interfere. It's the story of the Watchers. The very beginning of the movie starts out with like these monsters are trying to attack these primitive people, and so these Eternals come down and save them from these monsters. And then at one point, I guess the kid drops a knife or something, and then the woman picks it up. The woman angel, whatever the Eternal, she picks it up, and when she's holding it in her hand, it all of a sudden it turns gold, and like turns into like this advanced looking weapon, and it's like she
Wow.
gives it to him. It's like it's that's literally how the movie starts. It's like they're showing you this, and then there was another character Eternal in that movie. Every now and then they would introduce technology to them, to the people. I mean, it's like it's so obvious. Like like this is what they're saying. Like
That's why I
that's what
love the
that.
Book of Enoch because it explains everything.
Well, it makes sense that whether you believe the Book of Enoch should be in the scriptures or not, I think this story is a worldwide story.
Absolutely.
So some people would say, "Oh, the Bible's copying off these older myths or legends and stuff." It's like, no, this is one story. So if the Bible story sounds similar to this other Sumerian story about the Anunnaki or whatever, it's not because the Bible was copying off this. It's because, like, how true is that story? I believe the story is true. Now, how accurate is the depictions in the other mythology? I think it's all one story, and people around the world are telling that story. So there's shades of difference. And, like, you can imagine, even like the Tower of Babel story in the Bible, it's that God confused the languages, but they all have this same story, and it's told in a different language. It's told by different people in different places. Yeah, that story happened. I mean, I think there's so much proof of it that again, well, I mean, there's a proof. There's evidence is everywhere. The evidence is overwhelming. That to me, that is proof.
I think so too. And I think it's fun to go in and look at the old Sumerian myths because I see the biblical parallels for sure.
Yeah. Hmm.
I see the same story that's been twisted a little bit and told a little differently. And I think, for example, so I did a show with Justin Brown from Prometheus Lens, and we were talking about Anunnaki, and we were talking about the Enuma and all that. And this is just my opinion, but what I kind of walked away with after researching that was that uh, this story that these Anunnaki came down here and were mining for gold and were, you know, created humans or created humanity so that we
Hmm.
could help them mine for gold. That to me, I got into that and I started thinking, I had this thought come in my head. And I was like, that sounds like a story that's been retold by somebody who wants to control humans.
Hmm.
Just all the little changes that were made in that story, if you put it up against the Bible, it seems like somebody came through, took the real story and manipulated it a little bit so that we could feel like, we are subservient to these entities. Like they created us, they
Yeah.
control us. I don't know, man. That's just, I don't know if that's,
Well, the interesting part about that, I know you're probably aware of Michael Heiser,
oh yeah.
right? So he famously called out Zechariah Sitchin. Like, so Zechariah Sitchin famously, he translated the Sumerian tablets and learned about Nibiru and all the outer space stuff in the Sumerian tablets. He's No, he did not. Like, so what do those tablets really say? I think that a lot of the stories that get repeated even by people like us, I think that these people never talked about being from another planet. Again, the stories that are the mythologies, it's always like these beings came down from the heavens. I don't know if it says that it created man, but it does make sense. Let's just say from the things that I do know about the story, it's like you have this god race that comes down, manipulates man's DNA, and then uses him. I mean, that's the story of the Watchers to me. Like that
Yeah.
genetic manipulation is one of the reasons I think that the flood was caused. The God sent the flood is because all flesh had corrupted its ways. That's what it says in the book of Enoch. That this new race of beings were cannibalistic. They were horrible, and it said in the Bible, it says that Noah was pure in his generations. So God sent a flood because he needed to wipe the slate clean. He kept one righteous man who's related, whose generations were pure back to Adam. Yeah, so that story makes sense to me. I
Uh,
think that, but it also makes sense that why we are kind of inundated with like ideas of aliens, advanced aliens, because it's not a new story. It's a more of a twist on a old
yeah.
story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I'm going to take this a step further too, because I think it was Sitchin's, like you said, translation that kind of breaks down that humans were like created by these Anunnaki. And if you look in the Sitchin and you start listening to people in his inner circle, there are a lot of people that were really close to him who would say, not quite out loud, but like, here and there in like hushed tones, they would say, Sitchin, he gets his information from the other side. Like he's in touch with one of these entities and they're
oh,
dictating
okay.
stuff. So that's the inner circle story, is that he was like channeling this information. And that's why I think, if that's true, because you see that with Nazis and Lovecraft and Crowley and everybody else, they think that they're getting this information from somebody else or something else. If that's true, that's why I think that this is a major deception in that story.
Oh, 100%. And that's the interesting part is like, yeah, the Crowley famously said that now we call them angels and demons, but one day we're going to call them something else. And then he draws that being lamb that looks just like a gray alien, like just like straight out of like a Spielberg movie, that looks like an
Mhm.
alien. So now it's like that was the main reason we made Ancient Angels, because I felt like that they were trying to write aliens back into our past, and so it'll make more sense for the coming deception about quote unquote aliens. Angels are not really from Earth either, so like they could technically be called aliens, and almost like just by definition they could be called aliens. Now, we don't believe they come from Mars or,
Oh yeah.
whatever planet you want to talk about in the sky, but I do think it makes sense. And it's also interesting.
Well,
Like,
there's not just one type of angel. There's
right, that's true.
like seraphim, teraphim, or not teraphim, seraphim,
Cherub.
cherubim. There's a couple others, but then there's also, like in the Bible, where it talks about the host of heaven, and there's all these interesting verses. You got, you brought up Heiser. You look at Deuteronomy 32, it talks about the divine council. I think that there's like a whole panel of these different type of entities. Like we could even go so far, I would call them non-human entities, because technically that's what they are. I'm not saying they're green aliens, but I think there's like a hierarchy to the angelic realm.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. We probably almost dogmatically just refer to everything from heaven that's not either a deceased saint, like a person who was up there and has been resurrected and is in heaven, versus like who's not God. They're just angels. But the Bible really doesn't call them all angels. An angel is a messenger. It's like it's a duty. So like an angel comes. That's why when they appear on Earth, they're usually delivering a message. So that's why they're called angels. But more accurate is they're called sons of God, as they're called in the book of Job and also in Genesis 6. And then also, yeah, they're the host of heaven. So they could be anything. Like, I mean, the thing is, like, the Bible really doesn't tell you exactly what they are. It's probably because there's an allure to angels and heavenly beings, divine beings, that we're not supposed to be fascinated with them. So that's probably why the story does not focus on them so much, because, that's really a big problem in the world, is worshiping of angels. That's what all the false gods are. I believe that they're angels. So yeah, that's really interesting. But I was going to say that I found it really interesting also that guys like Graham Hancock, who I was really interested in, I read his book, um, and he used to go on Joe Rogan a lot. And so on that podcast, he would often talk about megaliths, and then he would talk about DMT. He would talk about ayahuasca. And so it was his belief, and I think that he's got that pretty successful show on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse. Well, I did an episode with Derek Olson. We're breaking it down. And he was talking about ayahuasca, and he was saying that under this drug and the influence of a shaman, a medicine doctor, they take this thing and they call it, ayahuasca translates into vine of the dead, and they drink this stuff, they trip like crazy, and they go on some psychedelic trip, and these people interact with the same entity on this trip, and they see different geometric shapes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's really fascinating that if these people would claim that giants built these places, and then they encounter entities under this sorcery, pharmakia, yeah, they could actually literally be encountering the beings who created those things. Because in the book of Enoch, it said that the Nephilim, the deceased giants, they became unclean spirits on the earth, and those are your demons. Like, that's what demons are. Those are what normies would call ghosts, because ghosts are not like your grandma when she dies. A ghost is a spirit, an unclean spirit that came from a being that really does not belong, and that's
That
why
that would
it
be
stays here.
the disembodied spirits. I think the Book of Enoch talks about that too, like the
Yeah,
Nephilim.
yep. The unclean spirits that were some were put in the bottomless pit, and some were destined to roam the earth as unclean spirits.
Well, let me hit you with this, man. And I'm going to apologize to everybody because I've told this story quite a bit, but I have to tell you this because it fits in perfectly. Um, I ran into a guy in Nashville at like a writer's round, and we got to talking about, he knew about that pyramid picture that we looked at earlier. Like he knew about the I was like, man, I think there was like an ancient civilization here. He's like, yeah, there was 100%. He knew about all this stuff. So I was like, so we struck up a conversation, and I got his number and all that, and we continued to talk. And I wanted to get him on, and I still haven't been able to get him on. But anyways, he told me this story on the phone one night about DMT, about a DMT experience he had, and he was saying that every time he went into the DMT realm, the same entity came to him, approached him, and they struck up like almost like a weird type of a friendship. He knew the entity's name, and whenever he was done, because those trips I think last 15 to 20 minutes, whenever he was done, he'd come back to this realm or whatever, right? And if he was to take it again, even if it was 2 weeks later, he'd still run into that same entity, and they would pick up the conversation where they had left it off. And so he's telling me about all this. And then he told me the name of the entity. And I was like, dude, I was like, have you heard that before? He's like, no. I'm like, I know that name. I found it in my research. It's an old Frisian entity, like from a Nordic type of mythology.
Oh,
And like, yeah, I got like cold chills from it and everything. And I've been trying to get the guy to come on and to tell this story, but it's like, he did DMT quite a bit. I feel whatever. I've told the story, I guess. I can't take it back at this point. But like this happened to him every time he went in there. And I just thought that that was astounding.
Yeah, I mean, it's really spooky. I mean, I remember hearing that before I understood kind of the spiritual realm and, well, I mean, as the limited as I do now, understand it. But I remember listening to that podcast and I remember thinking like that it was really weird that people take DMT and they see gestures
Right.
and all the same kind of things. It's like that's because I've never done psychedelics. I was never like a perfect person, but I never went that far. But I guess when I was always told about drugs and like the DARE program, I just always imagined just people just imagining just the wildest things, and there was no consistency to it. But then you have these people having these very similar experiences where it's like it can't be a coincidence. I don't believe. And again, that people today, like especially in America, just do drugs for pleasure. But that's really not how they're used in other places. I mean, like literally, you have to go under the guise of a witch doctor in this jungle. It's like these ceremonies are old. And these people talk about encountering their ancestors. That's why they call it the vine of the dead. But again, you're not going to encounter somebody you're related to because people you're related to, they die. Their spirit does not remain here afterwards. So the spirits that do remain are likely remnants of giants and Nephilim. Wicked beings, too, because again, like that's why God flooded the earth. These beings were horrible. So that's why, in the same way that you have places like in South America where like the Aztecs were sacrificing people to appease these same ancestors. I mean, so like you understand what kind of level of spirit this is that you're communing with. And I do know that I mean, at least people will tell you that these entities might be friendly at first. Because they're trying to reel you in and they're probably trying to get their hooks in you. I think there's a lot to do with the fact that in this place we live in, it operates on some kind of authority and access to people. So like that if you give people access to your person, then it's kind of like that's God's rules. They can't just immediately possess you. But if you give them an opening, or maybe even giving somebody, you might be able to give these beings an opening for your child, even before they're old enough to be aware. But I think that's how everything operates. And yeah, if you went under the guise of a shaman and you're taking these illicit drugs in this ceremony, yeah, you've definitely given yourself access to this being. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can only speculate what the result will ultimately be.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing about the shamanism is that's another worldwide thing. You see it in just about every culture. Every culture that's still somewhat in touch with their ancient or older traditions have some sort of a shaman tradition.
Hmm.
And the shaman is to serve as this liaison between the people and the other side. And I
Wasn't it?
mean,
Isn't it kind of even interesting, even biblically? Like if you read like the Old Testament law, who would be considered their doctors? Would be the priests, right? So God tells the priests how to treat wounds and leprosy and all that kind of stuff. It's the priests who do it. So it's kind of like that we have tried, like in today's society, everything's really compartmentalized. But back then it was like you go to the priest to get healed. So they did too. But obviously they're not serving the same God as us. So,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. I found this really cool post that it was an archaeologist. They found a shaman's kit, and it's funny because it actually looks quite a bit like those old carvings where the entities are holding that handbasket.
oh yeah, that
It
little
kind of look
bag.
it looks
That's
like that,
weird.
but it was like a leather bound pouch that the shamans would carry around. And what they did was this guy had taken a picture of this that they laid out all the ingredients that was in the shaman's kit, and it was like horsehair, crystals, just a lot of really random stuff that like the modern man has no use for. But this was stuff for rituals, right? But also herbs. So it looked like it was for ritual magic and healing. Like
Yeah.
you're saying, they served a dual purpose, and you see this in like. So my dad went to Haiti one time on some sort of a missions trip, and he said that they were in the Haitian jungle, and they were all piled on the back of this truck, and they were trying to get to this one village, and they got stopped in the middle of the jungle by guys with like AK-47s, and they weren't allowed to pass until they got permission from the witch doctor. And it was real clear that that guy runs the show there. Like he's the he's in charge of these people. He's the shaman and he's the doctor. I just think that's
Yeah.
how it used to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that in the Bible, like the word pharmakia is translated often as sorcery. So
Bingo.
we think that's obviously where we get the Greek word, we get the word pharmacy from. And so drugs, drug dealers, medicine men,
Hmm.
doctors. I mean, yeah, that's I think that's where all that comes from. I mean, you do wonder, like, just biblically, like, that when Jesus heals people, he tells them your faith has made you whole. He doesn't say I healed you. He tells you, I mean, obviously it's your faith in me, but he's saying that your faith is actually what healed you. So then these days we go to different people to get healed. We don't recognize like that God made this place and obviously he could do anything he wants. I'm not saying like if you get injured, you don't go to the doctor, but I'm just saying it is interesting. Like actually my buddy and I were just talking about it on the phone the other day, is that biblically we're made from the dust. We're made from the earth, right? And then I think the earth is supposedly 70% water and obviously the 30% is earth. That's what we're made out of. I think it's really interesting to think that natural remedies make sense with that understanding that you can be healed by the things that are here because that's literally what we're made out of.
Yeah, yeah. And so I got lucky and I found like a South Asian herbalist that lives right down the street from me, and they have a little herb shop here, so I go there all the time. And it's very clear once you start talking to somebody like that that America's healthcare system and just way of approaching medicine in general is way backwards compared to the way it used to be and compared to the way the other places do it now. Like everything is a natural remedy for them. And instead of like surgery, like they use other techniques like acupuncture and all this other type of stuff. They use the herbs with like this ancient stuff that seems like magic to us, like acupuncture, but they it works for them. And I think it just goes back to like the Rockefellers, you see this time and time again, like throughout history, some rich guy comes in and sees how he can make a profit, and
Yeah.
basically they all the herbs, all the holistic stuff, the herb healing, the old methods, the old remedies, all that went out the window sometime around the turn of the century whenever Rockefeller came in and took over the medical system. That because they wanted to make everything into a pill, like a petroleum based pill. They could
Yep.
sell that. You
Hmm.
can't sell an herb. So what you see is, and this is what I see. It's like I see these massive hospitals look like cities, and then around them you've got this sea of concrete for the parking lot. That used to be a field, and what you could find in that field can heal you. It's like we've done everything backwards now, like
Yeah. Well, I think that's what, that's the interesting part is like that, like beef and things like that. They always tell you how bad it is for you. Like they try to tell you not to eat it. But what they're really talking about is they're talking about the one that's fed like GMO corn, right? Like
yeah.
corn-fed beef is really not good for you because they're eating crap. But if you have grass-fed beef, it's really good for you. And I think that's really how most of our medicine's supposed to work. Is like if we ate right, we wouldn't need to go to the doctor because the things that are grown here and they're ate here and they're natural. It's like those are the things that we eat. Like they say, you are what you eat. So I think that's how most people would be healed. But yeah, like you're absolutely right that I learned that a while back about how that you can't patent a natural remedy. So what do? They make a synthesized version of it, some kind of synthetic natural remedy, and then they can patent it, and then they can charge you an arm and a leg for it. And again, they're
And they can put all this other crap in there that's
right.
probably killing you.
Well, right, yeah. We don't know. We don't know what's in it.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, it's unique, and the truth is, yeah, it's a for-profit business, and it's really not a business that probably should be for profit like the way it is, because yeah, you'll get what we've got.
And it's the
And I think
same guy who took over the education system too. So he two birds with one stone there. That alone changed culture.
that's that hopefully people are starting to kind of get that. I think obviously I talk to people like you, and I talk to so many people more like-minded. But I do think it's kind of growing, because I think that after 2020, if 2020 has taught us anything, is like that we don't trust these certain people anymore. So if the health business dates back to this guy, obviously, yeah, you think like the modern school system dates back to this guy. And so now you have to understand like that you can't just the time to be naive about those kind of things is over. Like you have no excuse now. So, like, how much do you really trust these people who you should not trust, who have lied to you? So, yeah, like, how deep does the rabbit hole go? And that's what we continue to look.
Yes,
We
yes.
keep going.
I'm
We keep. It's
yeah.
kind of endless.
Yeah, it's the perpetual rabbit hole for me for sure. You just keep you come to one door and you just keep going and it opens up and you find a whole nother room of things to look at and analyze. And I do think that people are starting to wake up to it. I think that's why you see so much excitement around RFK right now in this position that he's been given. I think it's because people are starting to wake up to the fact that, we're being poisoned for real. The water's bad, the food's bad, there's too much sugar, there's too much seed oils. It's just all
Our
bad.
food's not food.
It's not food. Yeah, it's not food. I think that whole thing, like, yeah, I think it was probably like a movement kind of that sprung up in recent years about like eating like your ancestors. And I don't agree with everything they say, but I'm totally with that. I think, eat meat, eat plants, and try to find the stuff that's organic, down to the
Yeah,
beef, like you said, like not the corn-fed stuff. Eliminate your seed oils and all that. And I think if we were to eat more like our ancestors in that sense, we'd be great. We'd be good off. You'd see an overall decline, but that's just not going to happen until people get real serious. People need to get so serious that they're willing to stop drinking sodas.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like it's hard to quit these habits that we've been taught our whole lives. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, of course,
Mhm.
it's funny. Like I was talking to another friend. I was watching The Matrix again, and I was just like watching this movie. I'm just like, I know everyone talks about it, but I mean, like you're like thinking like, yeah, like that beginning part when Morpheus is telling Neo that you just can't really put your finger on it. What's wrong with this place? But you know that there's something wrong. And then he's like, the truth is, yeah, we were born into bondage. That we're slaves. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like the way he's putting it. And of course, you're just thinking like as a Christian, the way that the devil's got the wool pulled over everyone's eyes. I'm like, yeah, man, it's like you really are, and people really do fight to stay plugged in, even though it's like they know that there's something wrong. I also like the part when he's saying that you have the red pill, blue pill moment, and everybody knows this moment. But I like when he says, because everyone knows what the red pill is now. It's the truth, right? Do you want the truth? Can you handle it? Take the truth. But he says you can take the blue pill, you can go back to sleep, and then you can believe whatever you want to believe. It's like it really is. I mean, I
Yeah.
really do feel like that is a really important like concept that I think that's what people do is that they take the blue pill. They know that there's something wrong because everybody sitting in the chair knows there's something weird about this place. But some people say, "Why do I need to know that? I don't want to know that." And so that's when they take the blue pill, and then they'll just continue focus on material things that are not even real.
Man, that movie hit on so much too. And I rewatched it too at the perfect time. Like right when COVID hit, I ended up getting, I guess I got COVID. I think I was sick from some, and so I was laid up in bed for a couple of days. So I went through and I watched in 2020, I watched all the Matrix movies
Uh,
that were made up to that point. And it was just the perfect movie for me to watch at that time because I was starting to I've always had like one foot into the conspiracy world, but I was never all the way in. But 2020 is what pushed me over the edge.
yeah, that's
And that was
that's
the
what.
perfect movie to watch right as I'm going through this paradigm shift, because it hits on so much stuff, even the transhumanism and everything else, man. What a film. I love it, the whole it's like a documentary.
No, I mean, like, you wonder, like sometimes I do wonder, like when I'm watching this, I'm like, I know some people are very talented and they're really good writers. I do also know about the brothers who made that who are now sisters.
Yeah.
Kind of weird, kind of weird. I've heard some people say that story was stolen. There was actually a black woman I think that said that they stole it, but my buddy Brian sent me I think he sent me like a documentary from some other guy who claimed he seemed like he had receipts that they had stolen that story. That story is so deep, though. I mean, it's almost like it's so deep that they really are revealing like this place is artificial. And you can, like I said, you can think you have one understanding what that means, what I'm telling you right now. And then some people might have a greater understanding of what I'm telling you. And then some people might even have a greater understanding above that. But the way that they're revealing everything, that people are just going about their lives and just oblivious.
Hmm.
And then there's certain people who are kind of working behind the scenes, and certain people are controlling the doors and the keys. And you're like, whoa, like, yeah, it really is deep. Like, yeah, because it's funny, like I like watching lots of movies because I do like picking up the symbolism, and I'm watching that one where, yeah, like I thought I understood it on a certain level, and then I'm picking up new things that are in there, and I'm like, this really is. I know that those guys. I don't think those guys wrote that movie. It's
Yeah.
like
I
those guys.
was I was just looking. There's a name. I've got it written down somewhere. There's some strange, he's not very well known. He's like a psychologist kind of a guy. He might even be a parapsychologist who wrote a book. I got to find the information. I don't have it on me, but it seems like they at least the Wachowski sisters or whatever were at least aware of this guy when they wrote the script because
Hmm.
they did base it off of stuff that's already out there. Um, it I see it with movies a lot too. I mean, it seems like there's a great deal of foreshadowing in these movies, even like 2001 Space Odyssey. Like, there's a part in that movie where this guy's on a spaceship and he's interacting with the AI, and the AI is like gone rogue and is being hard to deal with and is like trying to take over. You know, that movie came out in 1968. And it
Yeah,
features
that's
AI. Like it's like there's a bit of a rollout to some of this stuff. And like another good one is I don't know if you ever watched the show. It's either is it Mr. Robot or Dr. Robot? I think it's Mr. Robot.
no.
Man, it's good. It's like it's hitting on stuff that's just about to happen in real life. It's and the way it portrays the reality of this world with the elites and the big corporations, which we saw that during 2020. Like the corporations are pumping out the narrative of the current administration, the current of that time.
Hmm.
So you see behind the scenes there's this conglomerate of like shadow elites running everything, and that movie or that show, Mr. Robot, totally hits on that, totally exposes all of that. And it's crazy because the guy who did that was Ishmael. I don't remember his first name, but he was like he's obviously from his social media accounts, you could tell he's a diehard liberal. And but somehow he didn't when he made that series, he wasn't like inputting his politics into it at all. He just got it right. It's like, it's like goes back to the muse, what it's like some people are getting their information from, somewhere else. So
Yeah, I've wondered. I have gone back and forth about what is the true origin of these stories. I think sometimes they're ripped off old stories,
Yeah.
like the mythologies of yesteryear. There's these repackaged versions and a modern story. Yeah, but then you get into the ones that are like you go back and you realize they were telling you what was coming. And so there's two options you could take this, and maybe it could be a combination of the two, is that people say that there's a connection between like the three-letter agencies in Hollywood. So they could literally be telling them, this is this is what is revelation of the method. This is Duper's delight. We're going to put this in your movies, and then eventually this stuff will come true. Or yeah, like literally it could be channeled. Like that these lots of artists, musicians, writers. I know that famously there was this guy named Alan Moore. Alan
Oh, yeah.
Moore was a really famous comic book writer, and he wrote for DC, and he wrote the movie V for Vendetta, or the comic book that was it was based on. Yeah, this guy talked about being possessed by a demon. He talked about using the Crowley method, and there was quite a few other guys who were. I think it was like maybe David Thorpe. There was a few people who wrote some of these real famous comic books. Yeah, and they were all using the Crowley method of writing magic. They were writing based on magic, and that's what they say. Yeah, you watch another movie like that. You watch V for Vendetta. Like you're watching this, and you're like, "Dang, this is really eerie." When you consider
Yeah, that's
2020 and
Moore.
all that stuff.
Yeah, Alan Moore. He's I got a bunch of his comic books. And yes, I came to realize about him that he was very much into the occult, and he's rather open about it too.
Oh,
It's
he's yeah,
it's
he
it's
tells you
nothing
exactly
new.
what magic is.
Yes.
And so I think that's a really interesting topic is that for like the Kabbalists and people like Crowley, magic is not what magic is on TV. Magic is literally changing people's minds, changing your consciousness in a certain way. And so if I wrote a beautiful song, I made a beautiful painting, and it made you feel a certain way. Like that's literally magic. And so they through the magic they can manipulate you. That's what he was saying. He was talking about like spelling spells. He was saying the word grammar comes from like a very fancy name for I guess this magic book called the I think the grimoire.
Yeah. Grimoire.
And he was talking about the art. Like he's like talking about like this is what magic is. It is like art, arts and crafts. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's really interesting to think like that. That's the way they present it in a very interest, like a. It's not how you think, but of course it makes sense now. Like that, the mediums that we use, and of course the mediums, right? Media's
Right.
television, programming, and so that if they can influence people through broadcasting this certain magic, that's what they're doing. It's like, yeah, but he's really candid about it. It's like if you know what he's talking about, you're like, yeah, he's not kidding.
Mhm.
He's not playing at all. He's being straightforward and telling you exactly what's true.
Yeah, it's out there, and there are people who are very honest about this. I mean, Hilma Af Klint, she's a surrealist painter. She said that when she sat down to paint, she let the spirits take over. She said she let them use her hand to draw and to paint. So all her artwork, it's kind of famous now. She kind of got big around, I think she kind of came out around that spiritualist movement. And the surrealists were really big in Paris in the 30s as well, and they were famously into alchemy and stuff like that. So all this stuff is, it- it's all connected. But Crowley, Lovecraft, Carl Jung, the list just goes on. They all talked about how they were getting their stuff from somewhere else. And like I was just talking to somebody about that song Black Hole Sun from
Yeah, that
Soundgarden.
was weird. Yeah, that's a weird. It was funny because there was that eclipse last year about this time,
Yeah, yeah,
and everyone was talking about it, and some people were showing that video. That video is really, really weird.
yeah.
Like I had no idea. I mean, I knew it was weird before, but I mean, like watching it, it's almost like that eclipse was like showing what people actually, maybe what they really look like, or it was getting them
Mm.
possessed by demons or
Oh
something. It
yeah,
was something.
like what's that movie? They Live kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because Chris Cornell, in interviews, because people will always ask him about that song because everybody wanted to know what it meant. They're like, what's this about? And he said he was, when he wrote the song, he was playing with words for words' sake. And I kind of got the sense from what he was saying that he kind of let the song like write itself. And I thought about like stuff I've read about with like William S. Burroughs, and even I think Bowie did it as well, where they had this method of using like, so I don't, so it would be like if you were to walk around in circles in your house, and in one room you have a TV on, the other room you have magazines on your bed, the other room you have a bookshelf. You're going through the first room, and whatever's being said on the TV at that time, you write that down. Then you go to the bedroom and you flip open a magazine. Whatever catches your eye, you write that down. Then you go to the bookshelf in the other room, pull out a book. Whatever catches your eye, you write that down. Then you repeat the process. And now all of a sudden you have 6 lines. And then Burroughs talked about doing this and how a message would begin to form. And that's what he was trying to do with his
That is
collage
so, yeah,
art.
that's so weird. I mean, it's to me, it seems dark to do that because I understand what, like, really where the message is coming from. But I mean, if you think without any kind of spiritual influence, you would just get nonsense. Like, because I mean, obviously, if you listen to the song Black Hole Sun, it does seem like it has a meaning to it. So,
Right.
like, just imagine if it was random like that and it still makes sense. It's like that's the kind of thing that it doesn't seem humanly possible.
Well, those
I
guys
think
were,
it's similar like that if famously if like songs like Stairway to the Heaven, if you play it backwards, it makes sense. It says like My Sweet Satan or something like that in there, and it
Mhm.
sends there's multiple lines that make sense backwards. It's a really weird song forwards.
Yes.
Backwards, the fact that it could have a message in there. I mean, the idea that backmasking is real, I don't think humans are capable of doing that. Writing a song that's catchy and good forward, and then also can have a meaning backwards. Like that to me, that seems like, yeah, you're that is forces that we cannot understand.
I
But no,
think
that's
so
interesting.
too. I think so because I mean you would have to record yourself talking backwards. You'd have to figure out what words sound like
Yeah,
forward, so you could, and then I don't even know how to explain it. You'd have to like rework gibberish to be able to make it sound a certain way backwards. Yeah, it's
yeah,
like it's I think it's like what you're saying. It's like forces at play, but all those guys seem to be doing some type of songwriting method like that. Like if you look at Gavin Rossdale from Bush, if you look at some of the early lyrics from the early Bush records, it's like he went through a bunch of magazines and just they're very random lines. It doesn't make any sense at all. But it's cool in the song because it's all artsy and stuff, right? It's kind of edgy in some kind of a way.
yeah.
And even what's the guy? Stone Temple Pilots.
Oh, Scott Weiland.
Scott Weiland, some of his lyrics have that too, where it's like the lines aren't backing them, they're not telling a story, they're just random, strange lines. You know, it's like I don't know. I just think that those guys got into that sort of. I think they got it from William S. Burroughs,
Oh yeah,
honestly.
yeah, no doubt about it. A lot of them were really influenced by people like the Beatles
Mm.
and bands like that, who obviously got really weird and psychedelic, and who were obviously influenced by Crowley because he's on the Sgt. Pepper's album cover. So yeah, like actually, it was funny you brought up that Burroughs. We did on our podcast recently. We were talking about there's this clip from David Bowie talking about black noise. It was a really creepy clip because he's saying like that there's this sound that can kill people and could literally destroy a whole city. And he was like, he's like, that's something that Burroughs got really interested in. And he was like, yeah, you could get a patent on it for $3 or $4 at the local patent office. And it was really weird. He knew a lot about this. And the guy was like, well, how many people could it kill? And he's like, well, it depends how much money you put into it. It's like he knew it was like really, really weird.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that he knew so much about that. And yeah, obviously David Bowie was very esoteric and really strange. I mean, it's funny because like if you look at back at the things he did back in, I guess probably the late 60s and 70s, it is so bizarre compared to anything else that was out there. But it
Oh
was good.
yeah.
But his music is good. His
He was
music is
like
he's
the
obviously super talented.
oh for sure. He was like the original Sasha Fierce. He came up with that alternate stage personality, like the Ziggy Stardust.
Yeah.
And he
Hmm.
did it. He the word on the street, man, is that he was in the Golden Dawn.
Oh, I believe it. I think it's really interesting. Again, like we were talking about magic, and then he played Nikolai Tesla in the movie The Prestige.
That's right.
And in that movie, I thought that that movie really told an important message that most people don't realize. Is like that the magicians in that movie were just illusionists. They were trying to sell you a lie that people wanted to believe. But the Tesla character played by David Bowie, he was actually doing actual magic, like witchcraft. So like what did he say? Because it was the Michael Caine character was saying that guy's a real wizard because we knew like the people who are the magicians, they weren't doing real magic. So Hugh Jackman's character needed to get a machine built by Tesla in order to do actual magic. And then of course it was more like witchcraft. But I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, like so that's kind of like in that movie they show you that the Crowleyan style of magic is just if you want to go to a magic show, you want to be tricked, right? So like people will look to see how the trick's done, but they really don't want to see how the trick's done because they want to be fooled. And I thought that's a really deep kind of message about society is like that again, it's like the blue pill. Take the blue pill and believe whatever you want. So people want to be entertained, they want to go on and believe whatever they want to believe, but they would never want to see that there's a man behind the curtain. There's a trap door. They don't want to know that because they want to be tricked. And ultimately, they show David Bowie, Nikolai Tesla's character, creates this machine that's actual magic. Because, like the theater operator says, "Oh, it's been a long time since I've seen actual magic," and he literally tells Hugh Jackman's character to dumb it down. So it's like, so not only are they performing magic to cover up the lie, but they're also using magic to cover up real witchcraft because they don't want people to know that either. I thought that was like, wow, that's like a level of another level of deep in this movie. I thought it's an excellent movie if you guys ever watch it.
Yeah, that's a good movie. I remember seeing that one. This was years ago, but Bowie wanted to do an album, a concept album based off of 1984, George Orwell. And it's a really interesting story because he was trying to buy the rights off of Orwell's widow to do that. And she wouldn't sell them to Bowie. So that's why he never ended up doing the concept album. But when you look into Orwell's widow, there's a high chance that she was intelligence, British intelligence. She absolutely was, in my opinion. Because British intelligence bought the rights to 1984 after he died. And then at some point, the CIA bought the rights to 1984. So there's this tangled web of like, but they had her, it's almost like they had her marry him. She was like his third wife. They positioned her to sort of work him for all this stuff. So she wouldn't sell the stuff to Bowie. But all those guys like Bowie, uh, obviously these guys in Zeppelin using sigils for their names, some
Yeah,
of the
what's his
guys in
name?
the Beatles.
Jimmy Page buying Aleister Crowley's house.
Yeah, the rumor is that they wrote that Stairway to Heaven in there. I don't know if that's true or not.
Did
I
you ever
think it's
hear the story
disputed.
about that house? I forgot what it was called. Gosh,
Boleskine.
yeah, Boleskine House. You ever heard the story about how it was built on the land of where a church burnt down?
That's interesting.
Yeah, there was. The story goes is that there used to be a church there, and the church caught on fire with the congregation inside of it.
Hmm.
So the people in the church died on that property, and they buried them on the property, and then they built that house.
Right. My mind goes like, what was there before the church?
It's
But no,
crazy though. But it was like even like Crowley got rid of the house because there was all these bad things happening. I think like deaths,
Oh yeah.
associated in there. And but you're like, yeah, so I think the house had this tunnel that went down to the crypt. So like you could go from inside the house under the ground to come out where the graveyard was. It's like if that
The
house freaked out Crowley,
right. Oh,
what?
the housekeepers there. The weird things would happen to the housekeepers there too. Like there's like one of the housekeepers was talking about how like they'd be out in the garden in the middle of the day and a shadow would just come over them. It wasn't from a cloud or anything. It was just something totally supernatural. Yeah, if it freaks Crowley out, I mean, my gosh, they think that maybe he did a ritual out there, kind of like a Parsons kind of a thing, where they say that the ritual wasn't sealed up, or like maybe like there was a portal or whatever that wasn't closed.
Oh, right.
But basically, it was like Crowley was at the Bolskine house. He was doing a ritual, and he got a call from the leader of the OTO in London, and he had to go pick up his stuff and go to London for some reason. And he never finished the ritual, so they think that he brought in he opened up a doorway they never closed, essentially. And a lot of people have said that maybe that the Loch Ness monster was, kind of came into this realm because of Crowley. I just thought that that was interesting.
Well, I mean, it's different. I mean, I've heard that Crowley was the Loch Ness monster because he was lived there. I mean, you could
Mhm.
only imagine the things he did, and we know that. Well, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but he bought the house because of the wicked stuff that had happened there. So,
Yeah.
what were they doing there to try to summon demons? Again, that's another thing that people don't realize what like real witchcraft is that it's just manipulating demons. So that's why they use sigils and all that stuff. It's to protect yourself from the entities you summon, and ultimately you can get them to do your will. But people like Crowley often mention that, yeah, like you have to be careful, otherwise they'll possess you and then they'll take over. Yeah, obviously these stories do not end well for the people messing around with these spirits because if I'm sure that place probably was charged with demonic energy, but obviously he couldn't even handle it. And this guy is like the people that the go-to guy for these people who do that kind of wicked stuff.
Mhm.
Again, it's so bizarre. Well, let's just say if what we were saying was not true, it makes no sense that you have all these famous writers and musicians associated with this guy. If you look into Crowley at all, he was a wicked guy. I think back in his day they said he was the wickedest. I think the Italian paper once wrote that he was the wickedest man alive.
Yeah, they
Got
kicked
kicked out of
him. Yeah, he kicked him
kicked him out
out.
of Italy.
Yeah, Mussolini actually, I think, put out the order to kick him out. That's how serious it was.
Oh wow.
I mean, yeah, again, Mussolini himself. Yeah, there was I was talking to a filmmaker who was doing some work. I think he's going to maybe make a documentary on this. But in the mountains in New Hampshire, Crowley spent some time in New Hampshire in the mountains, and one of the mountaintops out there that was being used for rituals, you can see, you can stand on that mountain and see like 20 miles away another mountain peak where the Betty and Barney Hill incident happened.
I'm not even aware what that is. What is that?
That was 1952, I believe. It was a couple, Betty and Barney Hill. It was like they were like famously an interracial couple, or like before their time, and they were leaving Canada and they were driving down through Vermont through the White Mountains to go home from a vacation, and they kept seeing a craft, and the craft started chasing them, and basically they had a
Like a
missing.
UFO type thing?
Yes, yeah, it's a UFO abduction incident. They had missing time. All this crazy stuff happened, and it's like one of the most famous abduction stories in ufology.
Hmm.
And it happened right in this area where Crowley had been doing magic. So, who knows if there's a connection there, but it's this stuff just kind of follows Crowley around, like a
Well,
shadow.
again, that being lamb, I
Mm,
mean, does look
yeah.
like what people would describe as an alien. If you sketch that out, somebody would say, "Oh, true, something from Mars.
Yeah, I liked what you said earlier about it. It looks like something out of Spielberg. That's it's spot on.
Well, I
Spot
mean,
on.
I think it's interesting. It's like that. Did you ever see that movie? Was it The Faculty?
Oh yeah, I do. I remember that. That was awesome. I loved it
There's
at the
another
time.
there's another great there's another great clip in that movie when it's I think Elijah Wood is saying that he's talking about like these famous people in Hollywood and he's like maybe they are aliens and that's why they always write about them. Maybe Lucas and Spielberg are aliens. And if you really think about it, not saying that they are, even though actually we on my podcast recently we were playing all these clips of these commercials where they're saying celebrities are saying they're aliens. Really weird. But if we never had Spielberg movies, would we really know what those aliens were supposed to look like? Because if you watch, especially like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it might be the first movie where they ever depict aliens looking like your typical gray alien,
Mhm.
where it's got big bulbous head, big old eyes, it's got really long gangly body.
You're
Like
absolutely
if
right.
if 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 not for Spielberg, would we see aliens looking like that? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
again, I
No,
mean, I know that if there's any truth to any of the stories, that's what people describe. But I wonder if people describe those things looking like that because that's what they're
that
shown,
was that
right?
that you're absolutely right, man. That was either the rollout or part of the rollout. I mean, yeah, I know it goes back to 1947, and in 47 you have a couple of things happening. Roswell, Kenneth Arnold, and also George Van Tassel out in the Mojave Desert. He starts like a he
Was
leads
it, so was that the Babylon working with Jack Parsons?
that was in 46, and
Okay.
that but what's interesting about that is if you read through the transcript, he wrote it, he documented everything Parsons did, and he said an entity came to him and said, finish this part of the ritual, and in 9 moons or 9 months, this thing will be released on the earth. And that was in like late March or April. So 9 months from that point would have been the beginning of 1947. So you've got that in the mix. And that's in the Mojave Desert. And what's weird, man, is that George Van Tassel leaves his job at Lockheed to move to the Mojave Desert. No, he doesn't know Parsons or L. Ron Hubbard. He just happens to move out there, and he starts the most, probably one of the most successful UFO centers of all time. He starts like a UFO religion out there, separate from what's happening with Roswell. So it's like everything lined up perfectly for the rollout of this 1947, like the UFO era. It all starts in 47,
Right.
and it's a lot of these little things that happen separately. Even the Maury Island incident was 1947, where you see the first Men in Black coming out of that. So it's like 47 happens, and that's when they roll out this idea that we're not alone, right? Or the notion the American public is faced with this notion that maybe we're not alone. There's UFOs and there's aliens. Then you start seeing Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the rollout of like what the aliens look like for sure. So, but it seems like you've got thousands of years of dwarfs and fairy lore. That was like the thing, and then it's almost like overnight in 47, something new enters the mindset of humanity, and it's this UFO
Yeah.
alien thing. And I know UFOs go way back before. I know that they've always been seen, but like something happened in 47 where there was a rollout, and then I think you see Hollywood picking up the baton and showing us like this concept of the green aliens.
Yeah, we talk about that. I know Brian specifically talks about that like what would be the modern UFO abduction story would be like back in yesteryear would be like fairies or gnomes or whatever, like some kind of weird creature comes in and takes kids. It's kind of like I said, it's kind of like the story of Peter Pan. Peter Pan takes kids out of their window wearing pajamas. He's got a fairy with him.
Mhm.
Like that's what it would
Yeah,
have been an abduction story back in the day. Even like he was like kidnapping. So kids are children of the goat. Who was the goat?
Pan.
Pan. Pan's the children of, yeah, so the kids. So it's kind of like when you say an alien abduction, you don't mean aliens are being abducted. It means the aliens are doing the abduction. So who's kidnapping? The children of the goat are stealing children. So that's what an abduction story would be like years ago. But today it's aliens did it.
Right.
I mean, the whole point is like that there's this phenomenon that's really we can't put our finger on. And it makes sense to like if this is in like the zeitgeist of the people, this is what they believe. Well, maybe their stories are going to start to line up because maybe it was aliens did it. The whole thing is like it's.
Hey,
I mean, I think most of it is a spiritual phenomenon,
for sure.
and I think that
Goes back
but
to
I do
ancient
think
angels.
I also do think about that lots of the crafts and things like that. I think that could be something that our government has,
Sure,
and
absolutely.
they want to they want to propagate the idea that it's aliens because if they do that, then people won't look any deeper because most people don't believe in aliens, so they'll just say if you saw like if you saw something crazy in the sky and you say, "Oh gosh, I saw a UFO, I saw an alien ship," and everyone would be like, "Didn't take your meds today, did you?" But if you went outside and you saw, I saw this crazy new jet by the government, people would believe you,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's why they want people to believe in UAPs and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like the whole thing, even with the drone phenomenon, the story that just disappeared like a fart in the wind. Everyone was talking about drones, right? They drag these people from the intel community in front of Congress, and they're saying, "We don't know whose they are." Does anyone believe they don't know whose they are? I mean, like I was just like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Then one day they just stopped talking about it. It's like they didn't want to tell us obviously whose they were. They were ours.
Yeah.
There was some kind of agency that is top secret, and they didn't want to tell people. So the same way that they would rather people say, "Oh, it's something from Mars," than they'd rather say it's something from this military base that's right near your town
Mhm.
because they don't want us to know what they've got.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whole drone thing is either the government or to me it reeks of aerospace, the aerospace community. And if you get deep enough in ufology, you'll start to see there seems like there was a shift. I think it may go back to Nixon, but it seems like I think that Nixon and the government decided they were going to take all the UFO stuff they had and privatize it. So they turned it over to Boeing and Raytheon and the aerospace companies and they sort of kind of washed their hands of it because I think that's possibly why its disclosure hasn't happened yet. They've been able to just string this out for as long as they have is it's the government doesn't necessarily have all the information on the UFO files anymore. I think it went over to aerospace. And there's a problem there because in the 40s, von Braun and the paperclip Nazis sort of infiltrated the aerospace world.
Oh,
So,
definitely, yeah.
you introduce all these wacky characters in this as well, and it's just a big
Satanists,
mess.
Nazis,
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. But and it goes back to the entities though. For me, it's like with your documentary, man. It's like it goes back to these, like for instance, Jack Parsons and Van Tassel, although they didn't know each other, they end up in the same desert talking to an entity named Ashtar, the Sumerian goddess of Babylon. Um, they both independently said they were contacted by a divine feminine goddess figure. Van Tassel straight up said her name is Ashtar.
That's
Uh,
interesting.
um, Parsons was calling her the goddess Babylon. Uh, and that's who was to be released on the earth or to the west, in my opinion. That's who was to come to the west after the ritual was all said and done for him. Because if you look into the goddess Babylon, I actually looked into it. I found a guy who took like 7 years to write. He's an occultist. He wrote a book on the goddess Babylon. And he said in her earliest forms, she's Ishtar, Ashtar, or Inanna, because she goes by different names. So Van Tassel is saying he's being communicated to by Ashtar, and he goes on to start the Ashtar Command and the Ashtar movement. It's like this UFO religion that springs up overnight in the desert, same desert that Jack Parsons is contacting an entity named Ashtar, or the goddess Babylon. So for me, it totally goes back to the ancient angels idea.
It's interesting, and I just made this connection just the other day. I don't know how I can't verify this or anything, but I would say that when people wonder who Mystery Babylon is or the Whore of Babylon was in the Bible,
Hmm.
I think it's actually really clear. It's Jerusalem. It's the reason she's a whore is because she's supposed to be faithful to God. And that's why it's like basically like Israel came out of captivity and they went back into the land, but they have this mystery Kabbalist system in the times of Jesus. So when Jesus is calling them out, he's saying how wicked they are. It's because they were literally appearing to be this one way, following God's commandments, but in secret, they were doing all the wicked things. So over and over again, the Bible does call Jerusalem a whore. Also, they did worship like after the captivity, right around the time of the captivity with Nebuchadnezzar, they were doing these drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven. So it kind of makes sense. It's like it's kind of there's both of it. But I think it's kind of interesting the timing of when Jack Parsons was doing the summoning of the Whore of Babylon. It's right around 1948, huh? I mean, I mean, I don't know if there's anything. I mean, that could just be a major coincidence, but it's kind of interesting that Israel became a nation again right around that same time. And
Well,
as a Christian,
they were doing the talks to become a nation in 47.
well, they were definitely at that time they were going over there. So they didn't officially become a nation
Yes.
until 1948, but they were definitely the whole time they were going into the land. Then I was like, oh, that's really interesting because I never considered it like that could have anything to do with it. Maybe it doesn't, but
Hey, it's interesting too. There's a story out there that I haven't been able to discredit yet that in 47, on one of the nights that they were having a UN talk to establish Israel as a nation, that's when they pulled the Dead Sea Scrolls out to analyze, particularly the book of Enoch.
ooh,
So,
that's weird. That's weird.
so you have a guy who's he's looking at the book of Enoch from the Dead Sea Scrolls just to make sure it's legit the same night that they're talking about creating Israel as a nation. And if you look at the book of Enoch, in like the first couple verses, it says this is a book meant for a
Yeah, future generation.
future generation.
That's really weird. That's really cryptic. Yeah, I mean that whole
Yeah,
thing. It's like, yeah, what does it all mean? I mean, I think some people know what it means. I do think that. I mean, I'm not one of these people. I don't believe that the pre-trip, the rapture is about to happen, and I'm not one of those people. So, but I do think that based on the Balfour Declaration and the people who were pushing to make Israel a nation again, I do think that there's some timing about that, like that they did it at a certain time. Maybe they would have done it earlier, but I think it's really interesting, especially the way that kind of the modern church talks about the rapture, and they viewed the Israel becoming a nation again as biblical prophecy. And so they were saying like, oh, well, then Jesus is coming back based on this certain timeline. I think that let's just say that's not true. Let's just say, but the people who established Israel as a nation with like sowed the seeds for that with the Schofield Bible and all that stuff. I do kind of wonder like that if that's what they wanted people to believe, why did they want people to believe that? Like I almost feel like that there's still whether the rapture is not coming, what is coming? Because I do feel like that there is a shelf life to that idea that people would accept it for a certain amount of time because obviously people who believe in dispensationalism they're trying to stretch the definition of a generation out in order to make it work where the rapture could still be soon, I guess. But what after a certain time that's unfeasible because people will just have to say like, well, I mean it can't be that.
mm-hmm.
So I kind of do wonder if there is another plan for. I mean, I know that there's another plan for the people who established it. As maybe there's some kind of countdown to something, which I don't know what it
Yeah,
is.
I think that I don't know what it is either, but there does seem to be. I like that. I like how you worded that. There does seem to be a countdown, even like in the book of Enoch when it talks about how the Watchers are to be locked up for 70 generations. Semyaza was locked up by the archangel Michael. God told
Hmm.
him lock them up for 70 generations. And it's like, I don't know what a generation is because you can derive several numbers from the Bible for that. But if you were to use Psalms 90:10's version, it it seems to point to a generation or a lifespan being 70 to 80 years, but they say 70 years for sure. And if you take 70 times 70, that's 4,900 years. Um, so, and what's crazy is the curse itself seems to have been placed 4,900 years ago in the time of Jared. So it
You know what?
seems
That's
like,
I don't know how much you've seen some of the content I've made though. The one thing I'm sure of is this year is not 2025. I mean, it's kind of just let's just say it's a social construct anyways, because the whole AD BC chronology, like it was ever some kind of clean break where they knew when basically the first day of creation was versus when they decided what date it was.
mhm.
I think that some of the research I've seen, I think that our timeline could be up at a minimum of like 700 years, where it's
Like it's
actually,
off 700 years.
yeah, it's at the minimum.
Mm,
I mean, and this is based on there was a German researcher, professor, sociologist. He did something about research into stratigraphy, and he established it like the first millennia AD. There's 700 years of fluff in there. And I think it's really interesting because I mean, so like some people try to like date, like come up with time. Like a lot of people who believe in like the rapture's coming, they'll say, "Oh, makes sense. We're about year 6,000. So after year 6,000, you have 1,000 years, the millennial reign." But we, if you believe the Bible, you can do a pretty good job of dating from Adam to Jesus. But the truth is, we really do have to take a lot of things on faith that should not be taken on faith from our timeline post the Bible as a Christian. Because I think that when you do start to look into history, as we've kind of already talked about earlier in the American history, it's full of just holes or just straight out fabrications. So
yeah.
being able to trust what date it
Yeah, you got a good point, man.
is really hard to do. I mean, like I said, you just have to take things on faith.
Yeah. No,
And
you're right.
and obviously something like that, you should be able to have a lot of receipts for the dates. But that's why they call the Dark Ages the Dark Ages. It's not because it was a bad time. It's because they don't know what happened because there's a bunch of holes in the history. Then
Yeah.
like technology, I think it was like architecture, language, and um and culture did not advance during that time.
Well, have you looked into the Byzantine aspect of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again,
Constantinople?
there was like 1,000 year Christian empire, but again, like I don't know that it was actually 1,000 years because I think that people they um they tried to say it was this long because that's how much time they had. But I think the chronology has been wrecked, and we
Yeah.
might have to do another
Yeah,
podcast about
yeah, I
this
was
because
gonna say. I
it
was
would
gonna
take too long
say.
to kind of get too much into this. But
Yeah.
just put it this way: there's people like Fomenko and Gunnar Heinsohn have done really good research into the idea that our timeline's wrong, and I think this might not give you a lot of answers, but it gives you maybe more an explanation of why we've been lied to so much and why we have been lied to and why we could be lied to is
Yeah,
because history is a set of lies agreed upon.
for sure, man. Maybe we can do that because I that opens up a whole new
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say
door.
that's a big can of worms.
And like we didn't even talk about Tartaria at all. And so I'd love to like talk with you about that and then this other concept that you're talking about, like missing history and just everything that comes along with that. That'd be an awesome thing
Yeah.
to do. Because and I'll wrap it up with this. Um, I came across a map. I want to buy it, but I found an old map for sale that has Tartaria on it.
This one
And
actually has like this one up here.
does it?
Yeah,
Nice.
it's at a picture, but yeah, like this is like my wife got this at some kind of just I
Is
don't know
it?
knick-knack store or whatever, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's awesome! Like use it for my background.
According to the seller and the seller's business, it's actually a real map.
Oh, I believe it.
It's the original. So anyway, but the problem is it's like $2,000. So like I thought
Oof.
I thought about doing a GoFundMe and like putting out the word on my podcast and seeing like, if people will help me buy this map, I'll unveil it on the show and I'll do a whole show dedicated to Tartaria and to the map itself. Because we'll just save this for another time. I'll save Tartaria for another time. But
The old maps are fascinating though.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's like they're super interesting. So yeah, I think there's a lot to glean from old maps.
yeah, absolutely, man. And like JT, I appreciate you. Like I promise, man, I wasn't planning on keeping you this long. It's just been a great conversation. I didn't want to cut it off. So
Yeah, no, it flowed well. I think that I know we didn't get to Tataria, but I think it might have went better because we just kind of let it roll. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, man, great talking to you.
Yeah, you too, man. You too. Tell everyone where they can find you and whatever projects you have in the works.
Yeah, well, so you guys see my name is JT Follows JC on social media, so you can pretty much find me everywhere. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook. Actually, I go by Joe Telford on Facebook. I've been doing a lot more stuff on there. JT Follows JC on X, TikTok, and my main platform is YouTube. But if you want to listen to the podcast, I'm available on Spotify and Apple, and my podcast goes under the term JT's Mixtape. So that's kind of like my most weekly feature I do, and other than that, just doing my live streams, and we talk about everything.
Yeah, I've heard your stuff. I mean, your reels and everything. And there's a story, and I'll save it for another time. But I noticed that there's a lot of people who you've reached with your reels that aren't necessarily into this stuff, but you've gotten like people thinking. And like I said, I'll save it for another time. But like, I saw someone in the comments of one of your reels one day who I remember from way back in the day who is not into this stuff at all. And I had the thought, man, this guy is getting some people thinking right now. So we'll end it with that. Everybody.
Well, that's good. That's all I can hope for, because I think I understand. You have to understand doing the things we do, and just being a Christian. I understood at one point, and this was something that really helped me. And this is what I can end with, is that I'm just here planting seeds. I'm trying to get people to ask the questions that I ask. I'm not telling you have to come to the same conclusions about me, about everything. But we want people to think critically about the things we're taught. There's certain things obviously you have to take on faith. You better be sure about the things you take on faith and who you can trust. Obviously, I believe I can trust Jesus. Everything else, I'm asking questions about everything. I want to see the receipts, because I'm not trusting liars. So if I can plant a seed in somebody, and I want them to come to their own conclusions, but if I can just help people think, I think this place will get more straight if I can do that.
For sure. And that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast too. I'm just trying to get people excited about concepts, and we have our work cut out for us. Everything we've been told on most days seems like a giant lie. But I think we're chipping away at this iceberg, man. And I appreciate the work you do. I appreciate you coming on. I want to encourage people listening, look in the description below and go check out some of JT's stuff. And with that, we'll wrap it up. As always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.
Everyone left me, everyone deserted me. Jesus was always there when everyone hated me and walked away. Jesus never walked away.